Welcome back to Punk Rock Theologian. We've spent the last few weeks reviewing some of the historical evidence for why we can trust the Gospels. But if you've been tracking with me, you might have noticed I've been leaning heavily on what we call the Church Fathers, a lot of early Christian leaders from the 2nd and 3rd centuries. I think it's only fair to acknowledge all of these guys are Christians. We're getting one side of the story. How do we know that their stuff can be trusted either? That's why today we're going to explore some evidence from ancient historians and even critics who were not followers of Christ, and yet they completely confirm the impact of Christianity in their time, along with corroborating a number of key details found in the New Testament. Let's begin with Pliny the Younger. He was a Roman governor who served under Emperor Trajan. And in around 110 AD, Pliny was the proconsul of Bithynia and Pontus, which were regions with a significant Christian population. Notice this is less than 100 years after the stories in the Gospel. It's within decades of the Gospels themselves being written. Not only is he already dealing with a significant Christian population well outside of Jerusalem, but he gives us some really cool confirmations when he describes how he dealt with Christians who were accused of breaking Roman laws against secret societies. Initially, Pliny wasn't sure how to handle these cases, so he conducted his own investigation. A very punk rock thing to do, by the way. He didn't listen to what other people said. He went and found it out for himself. He found that Christians would gather before dawn on Sundays to sing hymns to Christ as if he were a god. Spoiler alert, he is. But also, that's exactly what we saw in Acts 27. On the first day of the week, we gathered with the local believers to share in the Lord's Supper. Or Colossians 3:16 that instructed believers to sing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs to God with thankful hearts. He also discovered that they would take an oath not to commit crimes, but to live morally upright lives, avoiding theft, adultery, and deceit. Which totally fits with Colossians 4, 5, and 6, saying, live wisely among those who are not believers, and make the most of every opportunity. Let your conversation be gracious and attractive, so that you will have the right response for everyone. And finally, he reported that after examining them, he found no evidence of wrongdoing other than their refusal to worship Roman gods, which is precisely what Peter had taught in 1 Peter 3:16. Keep your conscience clear, then if people speak against you, they will be ashamed when they see what a good life you live, because you belong to Christ. Pliny's testimony confirms that Christians were already well established. They were meeting regularly, they were distinguishing themselves through their ethical conduct, even under the threat of persecution. Let's move on to the Roman historian Tacitus. He wrote in around 116 AD. In his Annals, Tacitus describes the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD, during which Emperor Nero blamed the Christians to divert attention from himself. Once again, don't miss the fact that Christianity is a big thing already. Just a few decades after Jesus walked the earth, there are enough Christians in Rome, not Jerusalem, not even Israel, but in Rome, for this to be a crowd that Nero's pinning the blame on. Even beyond that, Tacitus gives us some critical information about early Christians. He refers to them as followers of Christus, which is Christ, who was executed in Judea under Pontius Pilate. The exact story we have in the Gospels. Specifically, John 19:16 says, Pilate turned Jesus over to them to be crucified. Tacitus confirmed that that's a historical fact. This is not a legend about Jesus. He also described Christians who were tortured, burned alive, or crucified during Nero's reign. Not only is this more evidence of just how widespread Christianity already was, but it's a fulfillment of what Jesus said in Matthew 10:22, where he said, all nations will hate you because you are my followers, but everyone who endures to the end will be saved. Don't forget, Tacitus was not a Christian. He called it a pernicious superstition. But despite his disdain for Christianity, he confirms that it originated from Christ and had spread rapidly throughout Rome. Let's go even a step farther and look at some ancient critics of Christianity. Celsus was a 2nd century critic. He wrote extensively against Christianity, attempting to discredit its teachings. The thing is, his very writing demonstrates that the Gospels were already well known and widely circulated among Christians because he's quoting from them all the time. Both Porphyry and Emperor Julian criticized Christianity, but acknowledged that Jesus was a real person who had lived in Judea. Jesus is not a myth. Celsus, Porphyry, and Emperor Julian were all known opponents of Christianity, and yet they did not dispute the historical existence of Jesus or even the miracles attributed to him. Their writings give us indirect evidence that the early Christian accounts were widely known and accepted as historical events, even by those who didn't believe it or even opposed it, showing the impact of Jesus and his followers was undeniable even to their opponents. The testimony of non-Christian sources, like government workers, historians, and even critics, gives a strong external validation of New Testament accounts. These witnesses confirm the existence of Jesus, even his miracles, the spread of Christianity, and the persecution faced by early Christians. Collectively, all of this testimony coming from well outside of the Christian faith strengthens the case for the historical authenticity of the New Testament. What we have, what we're following, is the same thing that it was then, and it was known and real then. It's just as real now. If we want to throw it away just because it's an old book, we have to get rid of every concept of history. If we're going to acknowledge that the world is at least 2,000 years old, then these events took place. And that's what Christianity is based on. It's not about what the Bible says, it's about what happened. And it's about how lives have been changed for 2,000 years, right down to today. And he will still change lives. He will transform your life if you'll give him a chance.